they have had several sellouts in a row, and then they'll do these performances that are outside of their venue because their venue can only hold so many folks, being a dinner theater especially. But they'll do these outside performances at like churches or at different venues that hold a lot more capacity. And they'll just have this overwhelming response where they'll be like adding seats to the aisles and adding extra rows and things. So the want to is definitely there. And I think
Hello, and welcome back to your favorite Mankato-based arts and culture podcast. My name is Willis Stout.
Hey, Grum here. I got my big sweater on today, and it is January 18th here in the solarium.
And I am your host, Jacob Bases. Today we are so pleased to introduce Ty Hudson, who is here on behalf of the Mankato Playhouse to talk about their production of Assassins. Ty, if you could, just introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a little bit about Assassins and then what's going on over at the Playhouse.
Sure. Yeah. So, name's Ty Hudson, and I am a Minnesota-based actor and educator. So, kind of run the gamut of like a lot of different theatrical practice. I do some teaching and do some workshops for intimacy coordination and fight direction and things like that too. And then make my way in the world as an actor as well in Mankato, which is awesome. Lots of opportunities here. And currently, one of those opportunities is at the Mankato Playhouse with our production of Assassins. And Assassins is a musical. It's kind of a wild musical, to be honest with you. It's, I think the best way to describe it is every assassin that you can think of throughout American history goes into a room together, and we watch how things unfold as they all try to like manipulate each other or connive and figure out like, oh, I think you need to shoot this person. Yeah, that's a great idea. I need a gun. What's the best gun? And then they talk about guns and things like that. It's a wild production. It's written by Stephen Sondheim. That's the guy who did Sweeney Todd, if you're familiar with Sweeney Todd.
Okay.
And he's done several other shows. I think he is the Shakespeare of musical theater.
Didn't that guy die last year?
Yes.
I heard about this.
Yep. And one of my favorite shows, Company, he's the composer for that as well. Like a brilliant lyricist, a storyteller who like tells stories in between like beats of music and how he uses rests and all sorts of different items of musicality in order to just infuse his musicals with this beautiful storytelling. It's kind of incredible, even though our subject matter, once again, is assassins. Hey, let's go kill some damn presidents and let's all get together and see how it all works out. So Mankato Playhouse, I can't speak to their exact mission of why they chose to do this particular show, but I can tell you that I know part of their mission statement is to provide high quality musical theater to Mankato in an arts community that is very supportive down here. I came from Minnesota State University, Mankato, and that's what brought me down to this part from the Twin Cities. And I got my MFA in acting there, and I can't tell you like how many shows we sold out all the time. And there's just an incredible amount of audience members who are engaged in this community, and it allows other organizations like Merely Players to be successful as well. But Mankato Playhouse saw like a gap, like, hey, I think we can also provide some entertainment for this audience, and that there was some room here for them. And so that's kind of they've made musical theater a primary focus for them.
That's awesome. What is it like as an actor, like coming into the like local theater scene? Like, how does one get involved? What does that work look like when you're, like, it seems like you do a wide variety of things.
Yeah. So my introduction to this community, it was just on a complete whim. So I'll just tell an anecdote of my story. So I was working up in the Twin Cities as a professional actor and working at a couple high schools up there as well. And I saw an audition posting come up for Highland Summer Theater, which is a professional company that's tied to the university. And they were looking for a Ren and Footloose, and they had this professional 4-week contract available. And I was like, hey, that sounds awesome. I fucking love Footloose. I know it's like kind of a goofy little musical. You can't dance in Oklahoma, but at the same time, it's like, oh, it's got beautiful music. I love all the 80s tunes. These are so fun. And so I sent in a tape on a whim and got cast and came down and performed as Ren back in 2016, I think. And shortly after, came back from my MFA in acting down here too because of that great experience that I had while I was down here. But if you were looking to get involved, like let's say Jacob wants to get involved in theater, and I think you do.
Sure.
So if that were to be the case, auditions are open like every organization has open auditions where it's not like we've got our set group of people and nobody is allowed to kind of touch our shows. Everybody's very open and inviting and welcoming for auditions. And then we almost, in auditions that I've been a part of, there's always new folks who are here and they kind of blow you away a lot of times. You're like, you haven't been corrupted by bad habits, or like if you're somebody who's never been engaged in the theater before, it's a really great opportunity to just dive in and tell some stories with us.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, I guess because when I hear that someone like went and got an acting degree, like I think that they're gonna leave. Like
Sure.
that my first thought is like,
Yeah.
well, what would you do with that here? But it seems like that you're like gainfully employed, you know?
Yeah. So, but there is something to say about there's a lot of opportunities, but there's not a lot of money. And even if we're talking about the Twin Cities, there's not as much money as there are in other markets. So the Twin Cities market is the most theaters per capita outside of New York. And
really?
so that's an awesome statistic to have. But as far as like actors making a living, I think it's like 2% of actors up in the Twin Cities make their living just based on the gig. And so it's a tough world, and you have to kind of differentiate what you're doing. And so a lot of people turn to voice acting. A lot of folks get involved in the commercial industrial game for film acting up there. We're starting to see some, it's not called snow bait because that's Toronto, but there's like some new film rebates that are happening up in the city. So we're seeing more films kind of reintroduction into bringing studios to the Twin Cities market. And then there's also things like teaching, which I'm pretty engaged with. And some of that teaching isn't just like, I'm going to teach you acting classes. Sometimes it's, I'm going to teach you fight choreography, or I'm going to teach you about intimacy direction. That's a huge one right now in the theatrical community. Like, how do we make believable love scenes happen on stage, and we don't just say, hey actors, go to that couch and now you get on top of her and make out? Like that's not useful. It's not, it doesn't create a great product. It's usually like really awkward, and the audience is like, ugh, I feel weird about this. And so we tell more engaging stories as intimacy directors and things like that too. So there's tons of different avenues in order to kind of round out your theatrical experience.
Is when you talked about Minneapolis being a most theaters per capita behind New York, is that a recent trend, or is that something that's been going on for a long time?
So I pull that statistic from, there's a book called The Biz by Beth Chaplin, which is all about the Twin Cities market. And I bought that book back in 2013. And so that was a statistic that's included in that book. So whether that still stands today, I can't completely speak to that, but I know at that certain time it was second behind New York.
Okay, and that was the total leading question to my next question, just so you know, because I've always wanted to ask someone who's like more in the that industry about this, because this is a theory that I have that just the way that, like, you know, we have an amazing amount of media generation coming out of like giant places like Hollywood. And I feel like we can make the best, most marketable, like highest quality entertainment that could possibly exist to be consumed. And I think the natural reaction to that when people are looking for community is to create a subculture of their own. And I think that that's like, now that like just the way technology is so crazy, even us being able to make a podcast like this, or like being able to shoot cinema on your iPhone, I think that we're gonna start seeing like really like hyper local like movies coming out and stuff like that. So when I asked if it's a recent trend, I was kind of wondering if you'd seen any of that. Like, do you see people kind of getting more into a regional subculture of theater, or it's a reflection of the grander? Does the question make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. And you see it in other places besides the Minneapolis as well. Like Albuquerque is becoming this little film hub because Netflix just moved a studio there. And you see like this kind of, like you were saying, subculture of film actors who are like, hey, I don't want to live the LA lifestyle. I want something that's a little bit more conducive to a slower pace, or something that allows me just to have more like intrinsic moments of thought and
Yeah.
contemplation. And so they moved out of that market in
Mm.
order to kind of just differentiate themselves from there. And so we've seen this like influx of actors go to New Mexico.
Mm.
And I think from a theatrical standpoint, you could say the same about like New York to Chicago. And then I would also put to Minneapolis in that situation as well. You do during my professional experience up in the cities, though, you would see actors who would like kind of use Minneapolis almost as a training ground, where they would do their first professional gigs. They'd start working at the Chanhassen Dinner Theaters or at the Guthrie or Children's Theater Company. And then they would say, hey, I've kind of cut my teeth here. I feel like I've learned a ton. And the training in that community is fantastic. And now I'm ready to move to New York or move to Chicago or move to LA and take another step. And primarily that becomes like, hey, I think I've learned enough where I'm ready to go make more money too. I think the financial feasibility also plays a factor there.
What's the feeling towards that in those institutions?
I mean, so from my perspective,
Mm-hmm.
I think it makes me sad because I want to be able to live in the Twin Cities. And there are actors who do, and I don't want to discount that. I know several actors who make a great living doing what they do and at the top of the game. But at the same time, I just wish there was more. And it feels like we have abundance of theaters at like the low and middle tiers. And then that upper tier, you just always wish there's more. But I'm sure that's everywhere. I'm sure if I was in Chicago, you'd feel the same way. You'd be like, man, Steppenwolf, like, come on, we want more. We want more. And so I think that's going to happen no matter where you go. But I definitely felt that during my years up in the cities as well.
Yeah, there's kind of that going on with like the music scene too. Like there's lots of like 5 to 10,000 people, and then there's a lot of 1 to 200 people, but there's not a lot of venues for like 2 to 500 people.
Sure.
And that's something that's like, I don't know if that's just a Minnesota thing or an all over thing, but yeah, I've seen the same thing in the music community.
Yeah. But I think that the important thing to also take away from the Twin Cities and from Mankato in general is just the abundant support of the arts. So even if artists maybe aren't making as much as I wish that they would, there's still an incredible amount of support that people are showing up. And whether they're paying a $50 ticket or whether they're paying a $15 ticket, the fact that they're there and that they're participating, that's something that I don't think you get everywhere. And I can kind of say that from, I have a bunch of friends who lived out in Los Angeles. And if we're just talking about theater, there are a ton of theaters that are just like these little storefront theaters, 50 to 100 seats, and they wouldn't have hardly anybody come and see their shows. It'd be like 10 folks. Or I had some friends that were in Orlando, and they would say a similar thing, like, it's Orlando, it's the land of Disney. Like, there's a ton of performers working at all the different theme parks and things. But yeah, when you're going to your night gig and you're performing theatrically, there's only 15 people out in the audience. And that would be a bummer.
Oh man, I never even imagined that all those people like who are those are actors who are doing the roles at those Orlando parks. But I guess that is another spot where you might go cut your teeth, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think that people in Mankato are hungry for it, and oftentimes that people that Mankato has like this accordion of size where like it is like 100,000 people who are here basically, and then it seems like we have oftentimes the entertainment output apart from the Mayo Center of like a city like a third that size.
Sure. Yeah.
So I guess I would wonder, what the opportunities look like for growth in that sector are from the perspective of a theater person.
Yeah. And so the Playhouse has tapped into something. They've done a few shows where they have had several sellouts in a row, and then they'll do these performances that are outside of their venue because their venue can only hold so many folks, being a dinner theater especially. But they'll do these outside performances at like churches or at different venues that hold a lot more capacity. And they'll just have this overwhelming response where they'll be like adding seats to the aisles and adding extra rows and things. So the want to is definitely there. And I think the Playhouse is like, we have our season, we do as much as we can, but I think there's room for growth in this community as well. And that if there's a way to tap into something, so I want to be careful that I don't get too much on my soapbox, but I have this soapbox
No,
about ticket prices.
Get up on it.
No, I want to hear it.
Okay,
Oh,
okay.
I
No,
cannot
it's so
wait.
about
I
time.
cannot wait.
Yes.
Buckle
So
up.
I despise when theaters have too high of ticket prices because I think it makes it an elitist avenue of seeing theater, and it limits your audiences. It makes it so it's not a growing thing but a diminishing returns. It usually is for a certain demographic of people, so it's not inclusive. And so raising ticket prices to me is not like the answer, but there are so many arts foundations here, there's so much grant money that's available, that if there's a way for a theater to tap in, and I think the Playhouse does a nice job of this, to tap in to other avenues of resources besides like, let's just raise the ticket prices on our audience and continue to narrow our focus demographic, but we're able to broaden theaters' horizons and scope while also growing the organization and growing access to more individuals, and then being able to pay performers, which I know is one of the Playhouse's like chief eventual goals, is that they want to be able to pay performers. They want to, I know they've even talked about like, it would be great if we could bring a couple performers down from the cities, because that we never want it to be like an incestuous pool of performers where we're just using the same folks and we all know everybody's ticks and we've all worked together 15 times. There's not a lot of growth that comes from that. We want to be able to bring in other individuals, new viewpoints, new vantages, so we can continue to develop as artists too.
See, that's interesting because, like, I think a lot about how the music industry would grow in Mankato, and it seems like people are already accustomed to paying a price that you feel is appropriate for theater here. And I have the exact opposite feeling about music ticket prices in Mankato because so many people are accustomed to like free or $5 shows where like it isn't even possible to like distribute that money in a way that doesn't feel disrespectful to the band. You know, it's like,
Sure.
hey, thanks for coming. There's 5 of you. That means you each get $32. You want
Oh,
a sandwich?
sure.
Like,
Is
Yep.
there like it's fine if there's not, but is there like a price in your head that you think is like a good range?
To me, I don't like to the Playhouse. I think their ticket pricing. This is, I think, with a dinner. Oh gosh, I should really have this
Yeah,
information
that's
on
tough when
lockdown.
you're adding food too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And so they have a little bit higher price range. So I want to like take that as a factor. But this is Ty speaking personally. I don't think tickets should get above $20. I think
Yeah.
if you're spending something to go to a movie, that should be pretty comparable to going to the
Sure.
theater. Especially
Yeah.
because we're telling different kinds of stories, and it's just so easy to watch a movie. Like it's a different sort of engagement, and there's a little bit of a passive nature when you're an audience member watching a movie. Like you have a literal wall there compared to when you're in the theater and you're sharing a space with people. You can literally feel the actor's breath and their pulse coming at you. It's just a different experience. But I don't think that it should feel like there's also a financial wall that goes up if you want to have that experience. I think that they should be pretty comparable in price.
well, that's like a recent, I feel like people have recently got a little bit more comfortable paying more. And like, I've been a little bit more on the disgusted end with the film industry asking me to like I want to buy a copy of a movie on like Google Play or something. And then it's like, well, this is $13 for you to own this. And it's like, well, that is real. Like, I think that's really bad. Like, I think it should be about $2 to rent it tops. And then, you know, owning it, if I can imagine, you know, buying a physical copy, like a DVD in a store. And this, I watch some bargain bin movies, you know, like,
Me
Yeah.
too.
like I think that should be easily reflected in those prices. But now going to a movie at the theater, like you're easily going to pay $15 unless you're going on like the cheap night.
So there was this thing that Disney Plus was doing a while back where you would pay the monthly subscription, $10 or whatever it was. And then a new movie would come out, like the new Ant-Man came out, Jungle Cruise came out, whatever it was. You'd spend an additional $20 in order to have early access for that movie on top of your subscription. It's like this weird thing that they were doing, and how they justified it was, well, if you went to the theater, that would be however many tickets that you're buying for your entire family. So if you think about it that way, it's way economical, way more economical. And I just thought it was a total ruse, and like they're just burglars in the night, stealing a lot of money from folks.
Yeah, like how many subscribers do you think Disney Plus has? Like 2 to 3 million.
Yeah,
Like you're fine with your $6.
yeah, for sure. Yep.
Well, I mean, I guess it depends because there's a lot of times I want to see a movie early. Like I want to see it because people are telling me about it and telling me I should see it. And there is a certain type of movie that I want to see in the theater, and there's like a type of movie that I don't. Like
Same.
for example, actually this is probably one of my favorite memories ever, but it could have only ever happened in a theater. Is I went to go see The Shape of Water in the theater. And there a lot happens in that movie that is weird. But this high school student, I presume, was sitting next to me, and every time the protagonist boiled an egg, she would go off. She was like, "Bitch, what the fuck is with these eggs? Why is this woman boiling these eggs?" I'm talking we're not under her breath at all.
Oh my gosh, that's great.
It's like the transition shot. So it's like this bitch with the eggs again, over and eventually she was told to be quiet. But theater. Sometimes I just want to see the movie, and I could enjoy it just as much in my own home. And I think I would have paid $20 to. Well, I mean, that's such a precious, so much. Oftentimes, when people are being disruptive in the theater, that's not a good experience for me. But that is one of my favorite moments in my life.
Well, and during scary movies, you see that a lot. Like if the audience starts murmuring, or if they jump on their chairs and they're like, "Oh my God, I can't believe she fucking did that!" Like those are great moments that really make it a visceral experience. You almost get a little theatrical, and you can really feel it. You can feel the audience tension.
Action and horror; those are the ones that I want to experience in the theater, and I get excited for. But like a slow movie, I don't know, man. I don't like. I just watched Banshees of Inisherin.
Yeah, what'd you think?
I loved that movie.
I did
too. I really sympathized with Colm. Until he cut his. Well, no spoilers. All right, you know what? I'm not
His
gonna
hair.
spoil
He cut his hair.
Yeah, we're gonna chill on that. But I liked that movie a lot, and I don't if anyone would have. I would have been more upset than paying attention if anyone would have spoken even one syllable.
Sure.
In that.
Yeah.
I'm a movie talker. I'll talk through the whole movie about it, so I just can't go to theaters.
So you are my wife.
Heck
She
yeah.
does the same thing. Yeah.
I'm a movie pauser. If someone comes into my space where I'm watching a movie and they start talking, I'll pause the movie and I'll look right at them.
But is it a vindictive look too? Is it what the hell are you thinking?
I just want them to say their whole thing.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, this is the moment you chose. So, they did spend $40 million to have this come to me. So, whatever you're saying must be extremely important too.
Dude, that's a good bit. You should say that.
That's so great. Yeah.
Being rude apart. What were we talking about? You just want to
Streaming, ticket price.
Should we talk
Events.
about what the production is like? What has it been like to be part of the production? What is it like to be a member of the troupe there?
Yeah, for sure. So they have rehearsals 5, and it's gonna increase to 6 times a week coming up here shortly. The show is segmented in a way where only a few actors are needed to be called. So I'm not necessarily there 5 to 6 times a week yet, but I will eventually. But it always starts with a musical. It's always going to start with music, and learning the music for this show is incredibly challenging. There's tons of weird off-key things that happen where 2 characters are in direct conflict with each other notes wise, which makes it really tricky music to try to figure out. But it's also part of the show. It's that conflict between these 2 characters having a dialogue through song where they're not on the same wavelengths. Literally, their wavelengths are clashing with each other.
And what is your role in the
I'm John Wilkes Booth.
John Wilkes Booth?
Yep, I'm the original American assassin. Yep, I kick us off.
Big
All right.
fan.
Big fan, yep. So that is something though, like he's a fascinating dude. I've been reading his history. There's a book called Good Brother, Bad Brother. It's all about Edwin Booth and John Wilkes. Edwin's his older brother, who's like one of the best Shakespearean actors we've ever had in our entire life. I love him. Our entire history of America. And their differences are just fascinating. One literally sided with the North and one sided with the South. And you just watch John throughout his history just get corrupted by these different ideas. And they lived in Maryland, so they're literally on the border of North and South. And he's the distance from here to Minneapolis from seeing plantations with slaves on them. And he's like, these people understand me. They love me down here. And so I'm gonna support them and I'm gonna go to bat for them. Yeah, fascinating dude.
Yeah. We stand with the North on the Triple Falls podcast. We are definitely against slavery here, and
Yeah.
that is what the war was about. I just want to say that.
It's good to hear. I did wonder when I was coming on here. I didn't. know
Yeah,
you guys
this
were
is
on that.
we don't follow the states' rights line here. We
Sure.
we have a accurate historical perspective. On
Yeah, we should really just include that in the call sheet. Like,
Yeah.
Civil War's about slavery. What time can you get here?
Yeah, just check that box. Yeah. Well, and what is how did these musical bits come together? Like how did they I can't imagine. I can't imagine I can imagine acting, but like if you asked me to sing on top of it, I would brick,
Yeah, yeah.
And do you have a band or backing tracks to add to that?
We're doing backing tracks for our production, which is really nice as a performer because you know what you're going to get. Like there's no differentiation in performance by performance, but there is something that you miss with a band because the way a band and a performer work together, and like if you get a little bit off or something goes funky or your track skips or something, like you don't have to worry about that with a band. The band doesn't ever skip ahead of measure on accident because somebody bumped into the control panel. The band is like in lockstep with you. So there's the pros and cons with it. I typically like to have a band a little bit more just because of that feeling that you get as you're working with them and that give and take that you have. But having a track is nice because, like I said, consistency reigns. But as far as how this kind of comes together, so we just hammer out these parts and it's a practice kind of thing that you have recording devices on your phones and you record your part and you hammer it out at home, bring it back together. And the jump that always happens from night 1 to night 2. You walk home from night 1, you're like, we're terrible. This show's gonna be awful. We're awful. Can't believe we all got cast. Thank goodness that somebody like is giving us the opportunity to show this to an audience, but it's gonna be a horrible experience for everybody. But then you come back the second night and you're like, oh shit, yeah, we're freaking good. Okay, I can dig this. So it's always kind of incredible the growth and development that happens even just 24 hours. And that can go for dance as well. There's like a limited amount of choreography that happens in this show. I'm not involved in any choreographic numbers. John Wilkes was a dancer, but I call myself a mover. So we do have that difference. But I don't have to really worry about it a ton in this show, but there is some choreography that happens as well. And typically in musicals, that's where you're always going to start. And then you start chipping away at the acting portion. Just because, like you said, it's sometimes easier to jump in to the acting portion than it is all that other stuff. Those are just extra layers that are pretty difficult. And once you have the music down, especially, there's a pulse to the music and to the characters that you start to feel like, oh my gosh, this is the character's heartbeat. And once you get that, now you throw me on stage and I have lines that I've memorized. I feel that same heartbeat. I feel that same pulse. And so that's always a nice place to start too.
Yeah.
What's it like going from the process of like getting a script? Do you know which position specifically you're auditioning for and whether you have seen the script in advance or are you kind of given that with the assignment too? And then what's it like starting that process? Like how do you approach it?
It's different for every show. There's certain shows that I've done where it's a brand new contemporary piece. And I've even had the author in the audience, which is super nerve wracking, by the way, because you're like, I got to fucking nail their words. Like if I mess this up, they're going to be like, that's not what I wrote. I would not be so clumsy with my words. But shows like that, usually you're not going to see beforehand. You'll see like a small character blurb and it will just say, Ty Hudson, 30s male, struggling to find a job, like something like that. By the way, that was an accurate character description for myself. And so you'll just get a small little description, and then you'll show up at auditions, and they'll hand you a script, and they'll be like, "Here you go," and you'll look at it for maybe, if you're lucky, 5 minutes, and then you'll go in there and you'll read with somebody else or read a monologue for the auditioner, and just try your best to capture the characterization based on this tiny, tiny little blurb that happens. That really happens in the commercial industrial world for camera acting. So I was just on a Toro shoot, and I want to say my audition for that was like, pretend like you're mowing your lawn.
Oh, I was like, is Toro a company that makes movies or the lawnmower company? That
The
was
lawnmower company.
So, did you get to mow a lawn?
Yeah, you know what? That whole shoot was literally me mowing an entire lawn and then like changing the oil and doing things like that. But like, yeah, I mowed somebody's lawn. They're next door neighbor to one of the producers. So, and I got paid a nice paycheck for it. So
Did you also get paid to mow the lawn?
Yeah.
I mean, no, I should have itemized that. Yeah, I should be like, hey, I need a little bit more. I just want $50. I just want your high school kid rate. You know?
Yeah. Find who's ever whatever kid's mowing in the area and whatever his rates are.
I'll try to match it.
These actors are coming in and taking our job.
But then you asked kind of like how that development works though too. Sometimes there are shows where you know what you're auditioning for and they'll give you music to prepare. So the Chanhassen is like known for loving when people dress up in character and when they sing a song from the show. So they'll like really highly motivate you to like, hey, learn this piece of music. And if you're doing Little Mermaid and you want to be Prince Eric, maybe you should come in with a white flowy shirt that's kind of unbuttoned a little bit. I was at an audition for Little Mermaid at the Cham, and this gal came in who ended up getting Ariel, and she had like this beautiful aqua dress that like just literally made her look like a mermaid. And then she scored the role. So there's some theaters, you find this out, like their personalities, that they love that. So it just kind of depends on who you're working with, and that just takes time to figure out.
Yeah, when I was thinking about the question, I was kind of wondering whether you're applying for a role thinking like this role is likely to be a good fit for my specialty, or if you're kind of going in more blind than that, which is what it seems like. It seems like in most cases you might be handed a script that you're like, oh, I guess so. I guess we'll make it happen. You know, we're like, this is 5 times as long as the last one that I did, but sure, I can memorize that monologue.
Yeah. What is the opinion on work too? You know, like if you're working in commercial films, I like just right before the podcast, we were talking about like, you know, what would happen. Like people make all kinds of stinkers. Like what, like how much do you look at that as like work, or like how selective would an actor be looking at that kind of thing?
Yeah, and that's tricky. So there was a point in my life where, I don't know, maybe I'm still in this point in my life, where I used to say it's like a tripod. It has to like accomplish I have to have 2 of the 3 legs of this tripod in order to audition or be a part of a production. It has to be at a theater that I want to work at. It's got to be with a director or like somebody in production that I've always wanted to work with as well. Or it's got to be an amazing role. And if it covers one of those 3 things, we're usually good. Some actors will replace one of those tenets with, is it financially going to be rewarding?
Right.
And so it just kind of depends on where you're at. But I typically, if it fulfilled 2 of those legs, I would say I would do that show. But there are times you go in and you think, oh man, this happened to me a couple times, where you're like, man, I would be just an awesome Hamlet. Like it's a dream role of mine. I've been like slightly preparing to play this role for the last 15 years. And every time I go in, I think the audition goes great. And they call me back for Laertes, the guy who he ends up fighting later in the show. And so I just never get that. They never see me as that role. They're like, nah, you're more of a Laertes. And so sometimes that happens as an actor where you're just like, man, I think of myself as one thing, but then I must present something different. So that can also be the actor's struggle.
Yeah, because it's like you can only, like, you prepare with all the information because it's just you, but then when you're in that room, it's like everyone else's information. So you're just whatever ends up happening.
Yep. Yeah, I think it hurts being like super good looking You know, like that's what I have always kind of dealt with, just being
it's hard.
and uncontrollably attractive.
Sure.
And so that's always really hurt me, I think. No, I asked a buddy once, I was like, hey, we only get cast as leads in musicals. Do you think it's because we're really good? Or do you think it's because we're not good dancers? And he goes, I want to tell you the first one, but we both know it's the latter. If we're going to use you, we'll cast you as a lead, but otherwise you're not good enough to be in the ensemble because you're not a good enough dancer.
I would have never even thought about that.
Yeah.
Because people want to be in the dancing roles often, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Very interesting.
Mm.
What's coming up though? Like so when I was creeping on the Playhouse page, there's other productions. Are you already involved with some of those or?
No, they're just in the process for Assassins right now on their main stage. They have a junior selection of shows as well. Oh, are they doing Junie B. Jones, or maybe they already did that one? But they have just a collection of shows that they also do for 18 and unders.
Oh, sure.
And so sometimes those will have overlap, but generally they'll kind of conclude a production and then they'll start their next one.
What's the lifespan of one of these things like? How long does it spend on either end of the pre and post production and when it's actually up?
Yeah, so we auditioned right before Christmas, like maybe December 15th or 20 through the 22nd, sometime around that range. And we knew what we were character-wise going into the holidays. And we started January 2nd. So right after New Year's, we kick it off. Show opens, I want to say February 9th. I'll verify those dates before we get off here. And it closes in the early 20s. So it's ends up being about a 2-month and change endeavor. And some shows are even shorter. Some are like a 2-week intensive. So at Minnesota State Mankato, when they do Highland Summer Theater, those shows will be 2-week rehearsal process. And then you put the show up for that weekend, and then all that work you put in to memorize all those lines, you just wave it all goodbye, because we're moving on to the next show, and you already have to be off book and ready for the next
How
one.
do they even do like set design in 2 weeks?
Oh, it's insane. Well, they have 2 spaces. So they would like build and prepare on one space. And then while that's performing, they're building and preparing on the other space. And they're kind of just bouncing back and forth. And some performers will go from rehearsal for the second show during the day to the performance for the first show at night. And then they used to do that for 4 shows, and now they only do it for 2, which was a wise condensing of that schedule, because you had some actors by the 4th show that were just haggard. They were like, this has been a brutal summer, but super rewarding, and I'm getting paid well. And
probably gets your chops up quick. Having to like separate those characters in your head and stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, what's the memorization? Like how do you go about like putting in that much dialogue into your head in such a short period of time?
For that process, I was in 3 of the shows. I had a light show for number 3, but the first 2, I was substantial roles in both those first productions. I had to come in pretty much off book for both of them. Otherwise, in 2 weeks, I could not memorize the musical that was going up for the second show while we were doing the play to begin with. It was just going to be too much. And as far as like how memorization goes, I carry my script around with me everywhere. Like it just follows me around. And my wife thinks I'm a weirdo because sometimes I'll sleep with it or I'll fall asleep memorizing lines. It's kind of miraculous what the human brain can do, as far as if you fall asleep, like trying to memorize a monologue, you'll wake up the next morning and you'll know more of it than you did when you fell asleep. It's like your brain is running through the lines while you're sleeping.
That's
kind of incredible.
Like why I tell my boss off in the shower. Like, is that like that's like what's going on there?
Yeah,
Like,
I suppose you're rehearsing, you're practicing. So then when it comes out, you sound really smooth when you tell them off.
oh yeah, it comes out totally. Oh no, I don't have a boss to tell off like that. But I'm sure like that's got to be the way it works, because man, I can't imagine like the amount of dialogue that would go into like an hour-long show, like trying to cram that into 2 weeks, especially when someone's like going off of your cues. Because like I can think about writing like a comedy set or something that's going like, oh, I need to hit this much time. But if I had to like tell someone to like hit a cue with me during that period of time, like that's a different thing.
Yeah. You ever you have ever just been up there like forgotten the lines and panicked like Yeah. What's the situation like when it really all goes wrong?
Yeah. I love when shit goes wrong.
Mhm.
Um, I have had the worst thing happen to me, and it was in high school, luckily. So it's like, let's get all the worst shit out of
Yeah.
the way. I missed an entrance in high school, and like nobody knew what to do. I was like the romantic lead, and she's just sitting there, and she's like, "Oh, what am I supposed to do?" And there was another person on stage who just like was in the ensemble and just walked over and assumed my role and just like went on and finished the scene, and all because I was just dinking around backstage. And then I was in a production of, it was a Madrigal performance. I don't know if you guys have Madrigal up here in Minnesota, but it's like this, it's the nerdiest thing ever, you guys. Like it's what's dress up in medieval attire and sing wassail, wassail songs, like just Renaissance festival to the nth degree, only it was in South Sioux City, Nebraska. And I forgot all my lines. And I had this like opening monologue that was in rhyming couplets. So if you don't hit the couplets, you sound like an idiot. And it was already in like it sounded like a foreign language. It was kind of Shakespearean in a way, but it wasn't a Shakespeare, so it wasn't that well written. And I just completely forgot it. And I just stood up there, blanked, and everybody knew it. And I walked over to the director and I was like, I don't remember it. And then he handed me a script, and then I read off the page. And so those were like the two worst experiences
yeah.
ever. But it still happens. In what I enjoy about when shit like that goes wrong is everybody tunes in. And it's like, okay, this mistake, the worst thing that happens as an actor is when you feel like you went on that whole performance on autopilot and you weren't engaged with the material. You weren't connecting to your scene partner. You weren't just open to this world that you've created. And when something goes wrong, you instantly tune back in because you're like, hey, I need your help. And then the person might be like, what were you saying about the kitchen door or something? And they can lead you in a direction where all of a sudden you're back on track. And now you're super engaged in the play for the rest of the time. You're like, I can't let my mind wander or that's going to happen again. So I'm blocked in. And usually the performance is beautiful after that. So I love mistakes. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about what's going on in the background, like how the relationship between the actors would also play in. And I guess I would maybe think about that in theater where you could actually see it, but it kind of feels so far away, through like a Hollywood movie or something. You don't even really think about how much that must have maybe work must have gone into assuming that role.
Sure. I have some friends who have been on Hollywood sets too, and they've talked about it's amazing how little of the script the actors sometimes have memorized. And they'll be just like getting fed lines, or they'll have like huge sheets of paper or a teleprompter that's just feeding them the lines, especially on TV, because the turnaround is so fast and they have to memorize these scripts so quickly that they'll just be like, I don't know what it is. And if you can just keep doing take after take after take, you waste a lot of people's time. And so they'll just be like, all right, let's throw a teleprompter up so they know their lines. And they'll just like make their focus off to the side where the teleprompter is. And obviously you're not going to look at the camera anyway unless you're breaking the fourth. So you just read it off and get through it.
Well, I mean, I suppose if you've been on like General Hospital for like 30 years already, like you probably just know how it's gonna go or something. I don't know. I can't imagine.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, do we want to grab those dates?
Yes.
And then anything you want to shout out, socials, anything, where can we find Ty and
Yeah.
Mankato Playhouse?
Absolutely. So Mankato Playhouse, the dates for this show are, I was trying to buy myself time. February 9th is our opening night, and that's a Thursday. And the show goes on at 7 o'clock that night. And it runs that entire weekend. We have a matinee on the 12th, which is a 2 o'clock show. And then we have performances picking up again on 17th through the 19th, and then the 24th through the 26th. The show concludes that last Sunday, the 26th. It's a dinner theater, so you have the opportunity to do show-only tickets, or you could pay for the meal as well. They have went through a couple different catering companies. I've had the meal there, and I was always really impressed with it. So feel free to check that out as well. And as far as personal socials, I have a podcast called Summers Off, and it's a movie podcast that I do with my wife. We're both educators and we do it seasonally. So we have a summer season, but we do holiday specific specials as well. So we had a Christmas episode, which we did Home Alone. We are also going to do a Valentine's Day episode. I won't tell you what it's going to be, but it's super romantic, as our fellow host can attest. And so feel free to check that out. And we have a Facebook page as well. Not a ton goes on that Facebook page besides I post the links to the episodes. But have a pretty nice following. We're happy with it. So it's a fun little passion project that we do on the side.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, hey, thanks for coming on the show. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Look
you so
forward
much,
to the show.
guys. Yeah, thank you. Come check it out. Come be a part of it next time. Audition for Mankato Playhouse. Love to have you.
Just what we need, more projects.
Close. I did.